The gentle golden light of dawn kissed the dusty streets of Pioche, Nevada territory, as Violet Graves clutched her swollen belly and stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror. 17 inches of her once glorious chestnut hair lay coiled beside her, the sharp kitchen scissors still trembling in her hand. Tears tracked silently down her hollow cheeks, but her eyes held the hard determination of a woman who would do whatever necessary to survive another day. The year was 1872, and Violet had been alone for 3 months now. Her husband Thomas had set out for the silver mines with promises of fortune, only to be crushed beneath tons of rock when the new shaft collapsed. The mining company had offered her nothing but condolences and a small wooden cross marking an unmarked grave. At 5 months pregnant and with winter approaching, Violet was watching her meager savings dwindle to nothing. The knock at her door startled her. Mrs. Finch from next door peered in, her wrinkled face pinching with concern when she spotted Violet's shorn head. "Oh, my dear girl," the older woman whispered. "I have to," Violet said simply, gathering the long tresses carefully. "They say Mr. Goldstein at the general store pays good money for hair, for the wig makers back east." Mrs. Finch pressed her lips together but nodded. "You'll need a shawl to cover your head. The gossips in this town are worse than rattlesnakes." Violet nodded gratefully as Mrs. Finch fetched a faded blue shawl. "I don't care what they say. My baby needs food." The walk to Goldstein's general store seemed longer than usual, each step heavier as Violet's hand kept drifting to her missing hair. The weight of it had been so familiar, a part of her identity since childhood. Her mother had brushed it every night, 100 strokes, telling Violet it was her crown. Now it was wrapped in brown paper, a commodity to be sold. The little bell above the door jingled as Violet entered the store, the familiar scents of leather, coffee, and tobacco filling her nostrils. Mr. Goldstein looked up from his ledger, his spectacles perched on his nose. "Mrs. Graves," he acknowledged with a respectful nod. "What can I help you with today?" Violet unwrapped the package with trembling fingers. "I heard you buy hair for the wig makers." Mr. Goldstein's eyes widened slightly, but to his credit, he maintained his professional demeanor. "Indeed, that's fine quality hair you have there." He examined it carefully, running his fingers through the silky strands. "I can give you $8. It was more than Violet had expected, enough for food to last several weeks if she was careful. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. As Mr. Goldstein was counting out the money, the door opened again. The man who entered seemed to bring the vastness of the desert with him, tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind. Zachariah Nash was known throughout the territory as a skilled horseman and cattle driver. Some whispered he had once ridden with outlaws, though no one could prove it. His reputation as a fair but formidable man preceded him. His blue eyes swept the store, lingering briefly on Violet before he approached the counter. She quickly tucked the money into her purse and turned to leave, pulling the shawl more tightly around her shorn head. "Mrs. Graves," Mr. Goldstein called after her, "don't forget your flour and sugar. You paid for them last week." Violet paused, momentarily confused, then remembered she had indeed placed an order but hadn't yet collected it. She waited as the storekeeper gathered her items, acutely aware of Zachariah Nash's presence beside her. "How are you faring, Mrs. Graves?" Nash asked, his voice low and surprisingly gentle for a man of his size. "Well enough, Mr. Nash," she replied stiffly, uncomfortable with his attention. "I was sorry to hear about Thomas. He was a hard worker." Violet nodded, not trusting herself to speak about her late husband without tears. She gathered her purchases and hurried from the store, feeling the weight of Nash's gaze following her. Later that evening, As Violet stirred a pot of thin stew, another knock came at her door. Wiping her hands on her apron, she opened it to find Zachariah Nash standing on her porch, hat in hand, a package tucked under one arm. "Mr. Nash," she said, surprised. "Can I help you?" "May I come in, Mrs. Graves? I have something that belongs to you." Hesitantly, she stepped aside, mindful of propriety but curious. No respectable woman would invite a man into her home after dark, but Pioche was a mining town with its own rules, and besides, her closest neighbor was within earshot. Nash placed his hat on the table and carefully unwrapped the package. Violet gasped as her hair spilled out, still tied with the blue ribbon she had used that morning. "How did you—" "I bought it back from Goldstein," he said simply. "It didn't seem right." Violet stared at him, bewildered. "But I needed the money, for food." Her hand moved protectively to her belly. Nash's eyes followed the gesture. "I understand. That's why I brought these too." He gestured to the door where Violet now noticed several sacks and parcels. "I can't accept charity, Mr. Nash. It's not charity. It's a debt repaid. Your husband once pulled me from a burning wagon, saved my life." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I wasn't here when he passed, or I would have helped sooner." Violet felt tears threatening again. Thomas had never mentioned saving anyone's life. "I didn't know." Thomas wasn't one to boast. Nash shifted uncomfortably, then straightened his shoulders as if coming to a decision. "Mrs. Graves, I have a proposition for you." Violet tensed, immediately wary. "Not that kind," he added quickly, a flush creeping up his neck. "I own land outside of town. Good grazing land with a sturdy house. I need a housekeeper, and you need security for yourself and your child. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you my name." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the bubbling of the stew on the stove. Violet's mind raced. A marriage of convenience wasn't uncommon in these parts, but this was so unexpected. "Mr. Nash, you hardly know me." "I know enough. You're Thomas's wife, and he was a good man. You're carrying his child, and neither of you should struggle when I have the means to help." He cleared his throat. "It would be a marriage in name only, of course. You'd have your own room, but the child would have my protection and name, and you would never have to sell your hair for food again." Violet's hand unconsciously touched the ragged edges of what remained of her hair. "Why would you do this?" Nash looked down at his hands, strong and calloused from years of hard work. "I've been alone a long time, Mrs. Graves. It's not a good way to live. I'm not looking for love, just companionship, someone to share meals with, to make a house feel like a home." There was something in his voice, a loneliness that resonated with Violet's own. Still, this was madness. "I need time to think." Nash nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "Of course. I'll come by tomorrow for your answer." He paused at the door. "Whether you accept or not, the food stays. Consider it payment for a debt." After he left, Violet sat for a long time at her table, staring at the coil of hair he had returned. Such a strange, unexpected gesture from a man she barely knew. Yet there was something about Zachariah Nash's steadiness, a quiet strength that reminded her of the mountains surrounding Pioche. Immovable, reliable. The baby kicked inside her, as if offering an opinion on the matter. Violet placed her hand over the spot. "What do you think, little one? Should we trust him?" The next morning dawned clear and cold. Violet had barely slept, weighing her options through the night. She could stay in Pioche, struggling to survive on what little work a pregnant woman could find. Or she could accept Nash's proposal, giving her child a name, a home, security. It wasn't love, but perhaps it could be respect, partnership, maybe even friendship. When Nash appeared at her door just after noon, his expression was carefully neutral, though his eyes betrayed his anxiety. He'd shaved and wore a clean shirt, his dark hair still damp from washing. "Have you decided?" he asked without preamble. Violet straightened her shoulders. "Yes, Mr. Nash, I accept your proposal on one condition." "Name it." "That we both understand this is a practical arrangement. I'm not looking to replace Thomas in my heart." Nash nodded slowly. "Understood. And I should be clear that I've never been good with words or tender feelings. I can offer safety, stability, and respect. I'll be a father to your child and a provider for you both. But I won't pretend to be something I'm not. That seems fair." Violet extended her hand, feeling oddly formal. "Then we have an agreement." Nash's large hand enveloped hers, warm and solid. "We can speak to the preacher this afternoon if you're willing." And so, on a crisp October day in 1872, Violet Graves became Violet Nash in a brief ceremony at the small church in Pioche. She wore her best dress, hastily altered to accommodate her growing belly, and a borrowed lace collar from Mrs. Finch. Zachariah wore a stiff new suit that made him look uncomfortable, but dignified. The few witnesses were mostly curious neighbors, and some of Nash's colleagues from the cattle business. The absence of genuine well-wishers made the occasion feel more like a business transaction than a wedding, which Violet supposed it was. Still, when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Nash awkwardly brushed his lips against her cheek, she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. "Ready to see your new home?" Nash asked as he helped her into his wagon. The ride out of town was quiet, with Violet taking in the changing landscape as they left the dusty streets behind. The road wound through rocky hills dotted with scrubby pine and juniper, before opening onto a valley nestled between protective ridges. A creek cut through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods showing their autumn gold. The house was larger than Violet had expected. 2 stories of solid construction with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, along with corrals holding horses and cattle. "It's beautiful," Violet said honestly as Nash helped her down from the wagon. "It's not much on the inside yet," he admitted. "I built it thinking someday." He trailed off, then straightened. "Well, it needs a woman's touch." The interior was indeed Spartan but clean. Basic furniture, few decorations, but solid floors and walls with no drafts, a luxury compared to Violet's previous home. Nash showed her around, ending with the upstairs bedrooms. "This one's yours," he said, opening a door to a spacious room with a large window overlooking the valley. "Mine's down the hall. I had Mrs. Finch bring your things from town yesterday after you agreed." Sure enough, Violet's trunk stood at the foot of the bed and her few personal items were arranged on the dresser. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her. "Thank you," she said softly. Nash nodded, suddenly awkward now that they were truly alone as husband and wife. "I'll let you rest. It's been a long day. Kitchen stocked, so help yourself when you're hungry." As he turned to leave, Violet called after him. "Zachariah," he paused, surprised at her use of his given name. "I know this isn't a conventional marriage, but I'm grateful. Truly." Something flickered in his eyes, too quickly to interpret. "Get some rest, Violet. Tomorrow's soon enough to figure out how this will work." The first weeks of their marriage established a routine of polite distance. Zachariah rose before dawn to tend the cattle and horses, returning for breakfast that Violet prepared. They spoke little but not uncomfortably, sharing the news from town when Zachariah made his trips for supplies. Violet busied herself making the house more habitable, adding small touches that slowly transformed the stark interior into something warmer. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, Zachariah carving wood or cleaning his tack while Violet sewed baby clothes from fabric he had bought. Sometimes he would read aloud from one of the few books he owned, his deep voice giving life to the words in a way that surprised Violet. For a man of few words himself, he read with unexpected emotion. As November deepened toward winter, Violet's pregnancy advanced, making movement more difficult. Without being asked, Zachariah began taking on more of the household tasks, bringing in water and wood, helping with heavier chores. His consideration was always offered practically, without fuss, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. One evening, as the first snow fell outside, Violet winced sharply while reaching for her sewing. "What is it?" Zachariah asked, instantly alert. "Nothing. The baby's just active tonight." She rubbed her side where a small foot or elbow had jabbed particularly hard. Zachariah watched her, something like wonder crossing his usually stoic features. "May I?" he asked hesitantly, his hand hovering near her belly. The request surprised her, but Violet nodded. Gently, as if handling the most delicate china, Zachariah placed his palm against the curve of her stomach. The baby, as if sensing a new presence, kicked forcefully right against his hand. Zachariah's face transformed with a smile that reached his eyes, making him suddenly younger, almost boyish. "Strong little one," he murmured. "Like its father," Violet said automatically, then froze, realizing the ambiguity of her words. Zachariah's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them before he carefully withdrew his hand. "Thomas would be proud," he said softly. Violet nodded, but found herself thinking that Zachariah too would make a good father, gentle despite his strength, responsible, attentive. The thought unsettled her. As December arrived with bitter cold, Zachariah insisted on having the doctor from Pioche visit to check on Violet's condition. Dr. Wilson was a gruff but competent man who had seen the worst of frontier medicine during the war between the states. "The baby's positioned well," he told them after examining Violet. "Another month, I'd say. Maybe less." He packed his bag and accepted the coffee Zachariah offered. "First babies can be unpredictable, though. You should consider staying in town as the time gets closer, Mrs. Nash. The journey out here could be difficult in labor." "We'll move to town after Christmas," Zachariah decided, brooking no argument. "I have business to settle there anyway." The doctor nodded approvingly and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "You've done well by her, Nash. Not many men would take on another man's child." After he left, an awkward silence fell between them. It was the first time anyone had so directly addressed the unusual nature of their arrangement. "You don't have to move to town for me," Violet finally said. "I know how much you value your privacy here." Zachariah looked at her steadily. "Your safety and the baby's come first. Besides, it's just temporary." Christmas approached, bringing with it an unexpected thaw in their relationship. Zachariah returned from town one day with a small pine tree tied to his saddle and a package wrapped in brown paper. That evening, they decorated the tree with strings of dried berries and paper stars Violet cut from old letters. "I have something for you," Zachariah said when they finished, handing her the package. Inside was a silver-backed hairbrush and matching hand mirror, elegantly crafted and clearly expensive. Violet ran her fingers over the intricate pattern, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Zachariah, this is too much." "Your hair's growing back," he said simply, his eyes on the dark curls that now covered her head in a short cap. "It suits you." Violet felt a flush rise to her cheeks. It was perhaps the first personal compliment he had given her. "Thank you. I have something for you too, though it's not nearly as fine." She presented him with a knitted scarf in deep blue that matched his eyes, along with leather gloves she had painstakingly lined with rabbit fur. Zachariah accepted them with genuine pleasure, immediately trying on the gloves. "These are perfect," he said, flexing his fingers. "How did you know my hands get so cold?" "I've seen you coming in from the barn blowing on your fingers," Violet admitted. "A rancher needs his hands." Something shifted in Zachariah's expression, a softening around his eyes. "Thank you, Violet." That night, as snow began falling again outside their windows, they sat closer than usual by the fire, sharing stories of Christmases past. Zachariah spoke of his childhood in Missouri, of a father who drank too much and a mother who died too young. Violet told him of her family in Ohio, of the long journey west with Thomas seeking a better life. "You regret coming?" Zachariah asked. Violet considered the question seriously. "No. Despite everything, no. The West has taken much from me, but it's given me things too." Her hand rested on her belly. "This child, a chance to begin again." She paused, gathering courage. "And you," Zachariah's gaze intensified, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes before he masked it. "I'm not much of a gift, Violet." "You're more than you know," she replied softly. The moment hung between them, fragile as a soap bubble. Then Zachariah stood abruptly. "It's late. We should rest if we're traveling tomorrow." But that night, as Violet lay in her bed listening to the wind, she heard Zachariah's footsteps pause outside her door. For a long moment, he stood there, and Violet found herself holding her breath, uncertain what she hoped would happen. Then, quietly, he continued down the hall to his own room, and Violet released the breath she had been holding, feeling both relieved and oddly disappointed. The journey to Pioche the next day was slow and careful, with Zachariah insisting on frequent stops to ensure Violet's comfort. They took lodgings above the town's respectable hotel, two adjoining rooms that maintained propriety while allowing Zachariah to be close if needed. The following days fell into a new routine. Zachariah attended to his business during the day, selling cattle, purchasing supplies for spring, settling accounts at the bank. Violet received visits from Mrs. Finch and other town women who had known her before, their curiosity about her unusual marriage barely disguised beneath their solicitous questions about her health. "He's changed since you married him," Mrs. Finch observed one afternoon as they sewed baby clothes together. "Less grim." He even smiled at Mrs. Peterson's little ones yesterday. Violet had noticed changes too. Zachariah seemed more at ease in town than before, less the solitary rancher and more a man with purpose. He brought her small gifts, fresh fruit from California, a book of poetry, a rocking chair delivered to their rooms for when the baby came. Each gesture, each thoughtful act stitched another thread between them, weaving something Violet wasn't ready to name. She found herself watching for his return each evening, taking pleasure in his deep voice as he recounted his day, noticing the way his hands moved when he spoke of things that excited him. New Year's Eve arrived with revelry in the streets of Pioche. The mines had been productive that year, and the town was prosperous, despite the hard winter. Zachariah escorted Violet to a small gathering at the hotel dining room, where the more respectable citizens of town had assembled for a celebration. Violet wore her best dress, altered again to accommodate her now very prominent belly. Zachariah had bought her a new shawl of fine wool that draped elegantly over her shoulders. As they entered the room, Violet was acutely aware of the glances and whispers. Their marriage was still a source of speculation, especially now that her condition was so obvious and their wedding so recent. "Ignore them," Zachariah murmured, his hand warm at the small of her back. "You look beautiful." The simple compliment strengthened her, and Violet lifted her chin as they joined the gathering. The evening progressed pleasantly enough, with good food and conversation. Zachariah remained attentive, never leaving her side for long, bringing her punch and making sure she was comfortable. As midnight approached, the band struck up a waltz. Couples took to the small dance floor, moving gracefully despite the cramped space. Violet watched them wistfully, one hand absently stroking her belly. "Would you like to dance?" Zachariah asked, surprising her. "In my condition." Violet laughed softly. "I'd be quite a sight." "You'd be radiant," he said simply, extending his hand. Just a slow turn around the floor. Heart fluttering, Violet allowed him to lead her to the edge of the dance floor. His hand at her waist was gentle but secure, keeping her steady as they moved in a simple box step that accommodated her awkward balance. Despite his size, Zachariah was remarkably graceful, guiding her effortlessly. "Where did you learn to dance?" Violet asked, genuinely curious about this new facet of him. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "My mother taught me before she passed, said every gentleman should know how to waltz." "She was right," Violet murmured, feeling oddly breathless as his blue eyes held hers. As the clock struck midnight and cheers erupted around them, Zachariah bent down and brushed his lips against hers, gentle, questioning, and over almost before it began. But in that brief moment, Violet felt something unlock inside her, a door opening to possibilities she had not allowed herself to consider. "Happy New Year, Violet," he said quietly, his eyes searching hers. Before she could respond, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen, causing her to gasp and clutch at him. Zachariah, alarm flooded his features. "The baby," Violet nodded, another contraction seizing her. "It's coming." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and fear. Dr. Wilson was summoned from his own celebrations, arriving with his bag and a grim expression. Zachariah carried Violet upstairs to their rooms, his face pale but determined as he followed the doctor's instructions. "It's too early," Violet gasped between contractions. "Only 8 months." "The baby will come when it's ready," Dr. Wilson said matter-of-factly, rolling up his sleeves. "Nash, get hot water and clean linens, then wait outside." Zachariah hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave Violet's side. "I'll be right outside the door," he promised, squeezing her hand before following the doctor's orders. The labor was long and difficult. Through the haze of pain, Violet was aware of Zachariah pacing in the hallway, his shadow passing repeatedly under the door. Occasionally, she heard his deep voice speaking with the doctor, tense with concern. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in rose and gold, Violet gave a final desperate push, and her child entered the world with a lusty cry that seemed impossibly loud for such a tiny being. "A boy, Doctor," Wilson announced, efficiently cleaning and wrapping the infant before placing him in Violet's trembling arms. "Small but strong. Good lungs." Tears streamed down Violet's face as she gazed at her son, with his shock of dark hair and tiny fisted hands. Thomas's son. "A part of him still here, still alive. Zachariah," she called weakly. "Come meet him." The door opened immediately, as if he had been waiting with his hand on the knob. Zachariah approached the bed slowly, his expression a complex mixture of awe, tenderness, and something like fear. "He's perfect," he whispered, carefully sitting beside Violet on the bed. "Would you like to hold him?" she asked. Zachariah looked startled, then deeply moved. "I would, very much." With infinite care, Violet placed the baby in his arms. Zachariah cradled the tiny bundle against his broad chest, one finger gently touching the infant's cheek. The baby's eyes opened briefly, unfocused, but seeming to look directly at him. "Hello, little man," Zachariah murmured. "Welcome to the world." Watching them together, Violet felt her heart expand with emotions too tangled to name. Gratitude, certainly. Affection, without question. But also something deeper, something that frightened her with its intensity. "What will you name him?" Zachariah asked, reluctantly returning the baby to her arms. Violet hesitated only briefly. "Matthew Thomas Nash," she said clearly, "if that's agreeable to you." Zachariah's eyes widened slightly. "Nash, he's your son now too," Violet said softly, "if you want him to be." Zachariah's hand covered hers where it rested on the baby. "I do, very much." His voice was rough with emotion. "Thank you, Violet." Dr. Wilson cleared his throat from the doorway. "The boy looks healthy, but I want you both to stay in town for at least 2 weeks. No traveling back to the ranch until I'm satisfied mother and child are strong enough." The following days were a haze of exhaustion and joy for Violet. Matthew proved to be a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in short but regular intervals. Zachariah arranged for a local woman to help during the day, but at night, he insisted on being the one to bring the baby to Violet when he cried, and to change his diapers and rock him back to sleep afterward. Watching Zachariah with Matthew revealed a gentleness in him that Violet found increasingly difficult to reconcile with the stern, taciturn man she had first known. He spoke to the baby constantly, telling him stories about the ranch and the animals, promising him ponies to ride and streams to fish in as he grew. One night, after Matthew had been particularly fussy, Violet woke from a brief nap to find Zachariah by the window, the baby cradled against his shoulder as he pointed out the stars. "That's the North Star," he was saying softly. "Sailors use it to find their way home. And your mother's eyes shine just as bright." The words, clearly not meant for her ears, sent a flush of warmth through Violet. She remained still, watching through half-closed eyes as Zachariah pressed a gentle kiss to Matthew's head. "I never thought I'd have a family," he confessed to the sleeping infant. "Never thought I deserved one, but you and your mother." He trailed off, emotion seeming to overwhelm him. After a moment he continued, "I'll try to be worthy of you both. That's a promise, Matthew Thomas Nash." Violet closed her eyes fully then, feeling like an intruder on a sacred moment. But the words echoed in her mind as she drifted back to sleep, stirring feelings she had kept carefully contained. By the time Dr. Wilson declared Violet and Matthew fit to travel, February had arrived with milder weather. The journey back to the ranch was slow and careful, with frequent stops to tend to Matthew's needs. Zachariah had modified the wagon with extra springs and padding to make the ride as comfortable as possible. Approaching the ranch in the late afternoon light, Violet felt a surprising sense of homecoming. The house looked welcoming with smoke rising from the chimney. Zachariah had sent a hand ahead to prepare for their arrival, and the familiar outline of the mountains beyond provided a sense of stability she hadn't realized she'd been missing in town. "Welcome home," Zachariah said as he helped her down from the wagon, Matthew bundled securely against her chest. The words felt right, natural. This was home now, not just a place of shelter, but somewhere she belonged. With Matthew, with Zachariah. The thought startled her, but before she could examine it further, Zachariah was ushering them inside to the warmth of the fire. The house had been thoroughly cleaned, and a surprising addition awaited in the corner of the main room, a cradle, beautifully crafted of polished pine. "Did you make this?" Violet asked, running her fingers over the smooth wood. Zachariah nodded, a hint of shyness in his expression. "While you were recovering in town. Do you like it? It's beautiful." Violet carefully laid Matthew in the cradle, which rocked gently on its curved base. "He seems to approve as well." That evening, as they sat by the fire with Matthew sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Violet felt a contentment she had not experienced since before Thomas's death. The ranch was remote, far from the conveniences of town, but there was a peace here that soothed her soul. "Thank you," she said suddenly, looking up from her mending to find Zachariah watching her. For what? For all of this. For saving us. She gestured around the comfortable room, at the sleeping baby, at the security he had provided. Zachariah shook his head slowly. If anyone saved anyone, Violet, it was you saving me. This house was never a home until you came. The simple honesty in his words touched her deeply. Zachariah. He met her gaze steadily, something vulnerable in his eyes. I know our arrangement was practical, a solution to problems we both had, but these past months... He hesitated, searching for words. I've come to care for you, Violet, more than I expected. More than might be comfortable for you given the circumstances. Violet's heart quickened. The circumstances have changed, she said quietly. We've changed. Yes. Zachariah set aside the bridle he had been repairing and leaned forward. I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you. Your heart belonged to Thomas, and I respect that. But I want to be more than just a provider for you and Matthew, if you're willing. Violet studied him, this strong, quiet man who had transformed her life with his unexpected generosity, who had bought back her hair because it seemed wrong that she should lose it, who had given his name to her child without hesitation, who treated her with a respect and gentleness that made her feel valued in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. I think, she said carefully, that the heart has more capacity than we give it credit for. Loving Thomas doesn't mean I can't also care for you. Hope flared in Zachariah's eyes. And do you care for me? Violet rose from her chair and moved to sit beside him, taking his large, calloused hand in hers. I do. Very much. When he kissed her this time, it wasn't the brief, hesitant touch of New Year's Eve. It was a kiss of promise, of growing affection, of possibilities unfolding between them. Violet responded with a warmth that surprised them both, her hand coming up to touch his face. I never expected this, she whispered when they finally broke apart. Neither did I. Zachariah's smile transformed his face, making him look younger, almost carefree, but I'm grateful for it. As spring arrived, bringing new life to the ranch, Zachariah and Violet's relationship blossomed alongside the wildflowers dotting the hills. The practical arrangement they had begun evolved naturally into a true marriage, with Zachariah moving his things into Violet's room one evening at her shy invitation. Their physical relationship developed with the same care and consideration Zachariah showed in all aspects of their life together. He was patient, attentive, learning what brought Violet pleasure and taking joy in providing it. In his arms, Violet discovered passions she hadn't known she possessed, a depth of feeling that sometimes overwhelmed her with its intensity. Matthew grew rapidly, his dark eyes tracking movements and his tiny hands reaching for the world around him. Zachariah was endlessly fascinated by his development, spending hours on the floor playing with him, making up games and songs that delighted the baby and made Violet's heart swell with affection. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant orange and pink, Matthew asleep in Zachariah's arms, Violet finally found the courage to ask the question that had lingered since Christmas. Why did you really offer to marry me, Zachariah? Was it truly just about repaying a debt to Thomas? Zachariah was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. No, he finally admitted. That was part of it, but not all. What was the rest? He shifted Matthew gently to his other shoulder before answering. I'd noticed you before, in town. Your kindness to others, your quiet strength, the way you carried yourself with dignity despite your circumstances. He paused. When I saw your hair on Goldstein's counter that day and realized what you'd done, what you'd been forced to do, something broke inside me. The thought of you so desperate, so alone. His voice roughened with emotion. I wanted to help, yes, but I also wanted a chance to know you, to be part of your life, even if only as a provider and protector. I never expected. He looked down at her, his eyes full of wonder. I never expected to fall in love with you, Violet, but I have. The words hung in the twilight air between them, honest and raw. Violet reached for his free hand, threading her fingers through his. I love you too, she whispered, the truth of it settling into her bones. Not instead of Thomas, but alongside that memory. Differently. Completely. Zachariah bent to kiss her, Matthew sleeping peacefully between them, a family forged not from blood but from choice, from compassion, from love that had grown in the most unexpected of circumstances. Summer brought new routines and challenges to the Nash ranch. Zachariah hired additional hands to help with the expanding cattle operation, building bunkhouses for them at a respectful distance from the main house. The business prospered, allowing for improvements to the property and comforts Violet had once thought beyond reach. She threw herself into creating a true home, planting a vegetable garden and flower beds, preserving fruits and vegetables for winter, turning the once bare house into a welcoming haven. Matthew thrived, crawling everywhere and pulling himself up on furniture, his happy babbling a constant soundtrack to their days. In July, they hosted their first real gathering at the ranch, a 4th of Independence celebration that brought neighbors from miles around. Violet had been nervous about opening their home, still self-conscious about the unusual beginnings of their marriage, but her worries proved unfounded. The community accepted them as they were now, a hardworking rancher, his capable wife, and their beautiful son. As lanterns were lit in the gathering dusk and fiddles tuned for dancing, Zachariah found Violet by the punch bowl, Matthew asleep in her arms after the excitement of the day. "Shall I take him up to bed?" he offered, brushing a curl from her forehead with tender familiarity. "Please. I'll finish serving the guests." As Zachariah took Matthew, his fingers lingered on hers. "You've created something wonderful here today, Violet. Everyone's remarking on it." "We created it together," she corrected gently. Later, as they danced under the stars to the lively music, Zachariah pulled her close during a slower tune. "I have something to ask you." "What is it?" "I'd like us to renew our vows," he said, his voice low and intimate despite the crowd around them. "A proper wedding this time. Not a practical arrangement, but a celebration of what we've become to each other." Violet's heart swelled with emotion. "I'd like that very much." The renewal ceremony took place in September, with the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides. Unlike their first wedding, this one was attended by friends and neighbors who had come to know and respect them. Violet wore a new dress of deep blue silk that Zachariah had ordered specially from San Francisco. Matthew, now almost crawling, was held by Mrs. Finch, who beamed with pride at the family she had helped bring together. This time, when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zachariah's kiss was confident and loving, drawing cheers from the assembled guests. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with food and music and dancing under a canopy of stars. As the last guests departed and Matthew slept soundly in his crib, Zachariah and Violet stood on their porch, his arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. Winter came again, but this time Violet faced it with confidence rather than fear. The ranch was well stocked, the house warm and secure, their future together bright with promise. Matthew celebrated his first birthday with a small cake Violet baked and a wooden horse Zachariah had carved. "He looks like you when he smiles," Zachariah observed one evening as they watched Matthew playing on the rug. "He has Thomas's eyes," Violet replied thoughtfully. but his spirit reminds me of you, determined, curious." Zachariah pulled her close. "Thank you for that, for allowing me to be his father in truth, not just in name." "You are his father," Violet said firmly, "in all the ways that matter." As the new year of 1874 approached, Violet began to suspect that their family would soon be growing. The familiar symptoms, the fatigue, the sensitivity to smells, were unmistakable. She kept the suspicion to herself for a few weeks, wanting to be certain before sharing the news with Zachariah. On New Year's Eve, as they sat by the fire with Matthew already asleep upstairs, Violet took Zachariah's hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "What?" he began, then understanding dawned in his eyes. "Violet, are you?" She nodded, smiling through sudden tears at the wonder spreading across his face. "In summer, I think, late July or early August." Zachariah gathered her into his arms, his joy palpable. "A brother or sister for Matthew, our child," Violet whispered against his chest. "Yours and mine." The months that followed were filled with anticipation and preparation. Zachariah was even more protective than he had been during her pregnancy with Matthew, insisting she rest frequently and hiring a girl from town to help with the heavier household work. Violet tolerated his fussing with amusement, knowing it stemmed from love. Matthew, now walking confidently and beginning to form words, seemed to sense the coming change. He patted Violet's growing belly with gentle hands, saying "baby" in his sweet, high voice. "That's right," Zachariah would tell him, kneeling beside them both. "You're going to be a big brother, the best big brother any baby could have." July arrived with scorching heat, making Violet uncomfortable in her advanced pregnancy. Zachariah moved a bed downstairs where it was cooler and installed a special pump in the kitchen, so she wouldn't have to carry water from the well. Every evening, he bathed her swollen feet with cool water and gentle hands, his tenderness bringing tears to her eyes. "I never thought I could be this happy," she told him one night as they lay together in the downstairs bedroom, the windows open to catch any breeze. "Sometimes I'm afraid to trust it." Zachariah propped himself on one elbow, his hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. "It's real, Violet. What we've built together, what we've become to each other, it's as real as this land, as enduring as those mountains. Promise me we'll always talk to each other," Violet said, suddenly serious. "That we won't let misunderstandings or pride come between us. I promise." His kiss sealed the vow, and Violet felt the baby kick as if in approval. The labor began 2 days later, in the cool pre-dawn hours. This time, Zachariah was prepared, sending a hand immediately for Dr. Wilson while he helped Violet through the early contractions. Matthew was taken to Mrs. Finch in town, where he would be safe and entertained during what might be a long process. By the time the doctor arrived, Violet's labor was well established, progressing faster than her first delivery. Zachariah insisted on staying with her this time, holding her hand through each contraction, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement when she thought she couldn't continue. Just as the sun reached its zenith, their daughter entered the world with a cry as strong and insistent as her brother's had been. Dr. Wilson cleaned her efficiently and placed her in Violet's arms, a perfect, red-faced bundle with a dusting of dark hair. "She's beautiful," Zachariah whispered, his voice choked with emotion as he gazed at his daughter. "Like her mother." Violet looked up at him, seeing the tears he made no attempt to hide. "Would you like to hold her?" Zachariah took the baby with practiced ease now, cradling her against his broad chest. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I've been waiting for you." The baby's cries subsided as she seemed to study his face with unfocused newborn eyes. One tiny hand escaped the blanket, and Zachariah offered his finger, which she grasped with surprising strength. "What shall we name her?" Violet asked, watching them with a heart so full it might burst. Zachariah considered the question seriously. "Eleanor," he suggested, "after my mother. If that would be all right with you." "Eleanor Nash." Violet tasted the name. "It's perfect. Eleanor Rose Nash. Rose, for new beginnings," Violet explained. "For the beauty that can grow from the most difficult circumstances." Zachariah's eyes met hers over their daughter's head, understanding and love flowing between them. Like us, Violet agreed. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the Nash family. The ranch prospered under Zachariah's careful management, growing into one of the most successful operations in the territory. Violet's gardens became famous for their beauty and productivity, with people coming from as far as Pioche to purchase her preserves and seek her advice on growing in the difficult desert climate. Matthew grew into a thoughtful, intelligent boy who loved books and animals with equal passion. Eleanor, called Ellie by everyone except her father, who insisted on her full name, was as fierce and determined as her namesake, with a laugh that could light up the darkest day. Two more children joined the family, James in 1876 and Sarah in 1879, completing their home with noise and activity and endless love. Through it all, Zachariah and Violet's bond deepened, strengthened by shared experiences, by challenges faced together, by the family they had created from such unlikely beginnings. Each night, no matter how busy their days had been, they found time to sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes just being, connected in a way neither had thought possible when they had entered their marriage of convenience. On a warm evening in 1880, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Zachariah reached over to take Violet's hand, his thumb brushing over the simple gold band he had placed on her finger 8 years earlier. "I was thinking about the day we met," he said quietly. "The day you sold your hair." Violet touched her now long tresses, which had grown back fuller than before. "It seems like another lifetime. You were so brave, so determined to survive." "I was desperate," Violet corrected gently. "You were the brave one, offering your name to a woman you barely knew, taking on another man's child." Zachariah shook his head. "Best decision I ever made. That day in the store when I saw your hair on the counter. I never told you this, but I knew then. Something inside me recognized you, even before I understood what that meant." Violet leaned against his shoulder, watching as 8-year-old Matthew helped little Sarah climb onto the wooden swing Zachariah had hung from the old cottonwood tree. James and Ellie were engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion about the clouds overhead, their faces animated in the golden evening light. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking us on?" Zachariah's arm tightened around her. "Not for a single moment. You and the children are everything to me, Violet. Everything I never knew I needed until you came into my life." Violet turned her face up to his, seeing in his weathered features the same steadfast love that had sustained them through births and illnesses, droughts and harsh winters, all the trials and triumphs of their life together. "I love you, Zachariah Nash," she said simply. "More today than yesterday, and not as much as tomorrow." His kiss was gentle, familiar yet still thrilling after all these years. "And I love you, Violet Nash, until the mountains crumble and the stars go dark." From the yard came the sound of children's laughter, rising into the evening air like music. Inside their home, lamps glowed warmly against the approaching dusk. And on the porch, Zachariah and Violet sat together, hands entwined, hearts beating as two people who had found in each other not just survival, but the truest, deepest meaning of home.